When disaster strikes, will you be ready?
Good evening, and we begin tonight with the monster hurricane and its deadly impact already.
When all hope is gone, will the government be there for you? If you're looking for ways to take your prepping to the next level, then you've come to the right place. Broadcasting from a secure and well-prepared location, it's time for Prepping 2.0. And now, please welcome authors Glen and Shelby Gallagher.
Welcome, everyone, to Prepping 2.0. I'm one of your hosts, Shelby Gallagher, along with my co-host, Glen Tate. Hello, Glen.
Hello, Shelby. How are you this morning?
I'm not quite caffeinated. So I truly believe as we go through this show, there's going to be an uptick in Shelby.
Yeah, I see this every morning. I know it to be true.
It's magical. It's magical.
Well, I wanted Shelby to start off by just briefly telling folks, we're keeping the sort of administrative stuff at the beginning. We're trying to kind of truncate it. We have so many new listeners every single week,
That's
actually,
awesome.
Both on the podcast and on the radio. A lot of radio listeners. And so I'm going to keep these to a minimum, but I want to tell people stuff that I think they probably want to know, and even if they're new. We have some mind-blowing guests like today and going forward. And I just wanted to mention a few of them because we cover so many topics. This is a reason to subscribe to the show on iTunes or however you subscribe to it, or to keep listening to it on the radio thing. I'm just going to tick them off. We had Casey from Harvest Right, who told us all about freeze-dried food. Today we have Andrew from EMP Shield, who's going to talk about EMPs and, more importantly, a device that his company's invented, devices really, that shield you, hence the name, from the effects of EMPs. This is a really big deal. We're going to have John Mark, who has done a million-view YouTube video on the coming Civil War and who's going to win. And in this thing, he's going to talk about, he's been on before, he's going to talk about what happens after the Civil War. And he's a new prepper, and he sent us 15 questions that he has as a new prepper, and we're going to answer them. I think that'll be fascinating. We're going to talk to the RV prepper guy at Sandpoint. I guess we already did. And he's going to come on. And then we're going to have Special Forces Ted again.
Nice.
Third time he's going to be on. Then we're going to have Dr. Peter Pry, who is Homeland Security and formerly CIA EMP advisor to the federal government. I mean, he's the guy. I mean, EMP details and what to expect in an EMP. He's the guy. We're also going to have Nurse Amy and Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy talking about pandemics. We're going to have Representative Matt Shea, who's a legislator and who is a recognized patriot leader, talking about patriot leadership. So that's just a smattering. I mean, think of all those topics, EMPs and food and special forces and all kinds of cool stuff. So those are the guests we have coming up. Shelby, what's in the merch shack?
What's in the merch shack this week? It has been exciting. We have had first of all, we just got back from Sandpoint, talked to a bunch of cool folks, and we sold a bunch of cool merchandise. So one of the cool new things that we're now making available on the website is this little window sticker. If people follow you in particular on social media, they have seen one of our previous guests, I should say, Mark Fulater, I hope I said it right, developed an I Miss America window sticker, kind of like a little, more caffeine, Shelby. I can't say the word. But anyway, really cool thing, and it's on our website now.
It's a decal. And it goes on the inside, so you can kind of see it, and it's a little subdued. It's the I Miss America Statue of Liberty thing. Mm-hmm. Orders, insanity. Actually, for real, shut down the website with the number of orders. We had to go and upgrade. I'm serious. Good problem to have. I'm not complaining. Upgrade the website bandwidth because I think 50 of them roughly in 1 week flew out the door. So get them. $10, shipping's included. Pretty cool.
Yep.
And speaking of, it's not really merch, but
it's a product.
Pam Radio. You guys, I talked about it a while ago. And Pam Radio, which is Prepper Amateur Radio, which is a thing I'm developing, and it should be out end of the year, beginning of 2020. It's an iPhone or Android app, and it's flashcards. And it's not to learn stuff for your ham radio test, because there are a million other products out there. By the way, hamstudy.org is the flashcards for like getting you're passing your test. This is practical stuff about radios that amateur or that the preppers need to know. And that is rolling. I've done the outline, 18-page outline, by the way. I like to be detailed. A lot of questions are answered in there. And that's coming, again, should be out at the beginning of the year. You're going to start hearing more and more about PAM, P-A-M radio. We have a Facebook page, PAM radio. Go ahead and get on that, because I think this is going to be good stuff. Well, speaking of newness and goodness and coolness, we have a new sponsor on Prepping 2.0.
So exciting.
This is cool. It is EMP Shield. And Andrew, who's the, I believe, CEO, I'm going to go ahead and say so, of EMP Shield, is our guest today and is going to talk about stuff. EMP Shield got a hold of us, and we very gladly called them right back because, well, I'll tell you why in a moment. And we're going to be out there raising awareness of EMPs and the fact that there are ways to mitigate and maybe prevent, I'll say prevent, the ill effects of having all your electronics fried. And this is a new thing. This is a new invention. This is a big deal. The reason we're so excited about this is that, from what I can tell, this stuff works. And here's why. Colonel Nick Norton, one of the 43 colonels, who's a real-life guy, friend of mine, he's an electronics expert, ham radio extraordinaire. He builds radios and stuff. He
builds towers.
Yeah.
And we're not talking a tower like, a garden rake stick.
Oh.
Like towers, like hundreds of feet tall kind of towers. He knows what he's doing with radios.
Call the FAA and get a little red light on top of this one, because aircraft might crash into the towers.
The guy knows his radios, yeah.
So I called him up and I said, hey, the EMP Shield guys, we're going to talk to them and stuff, but I don't want to be out there, recommending something that doesn't work. I said, what do you know about EMP Shield? And he said, I have 4 of them. And that's done. That's all I need to know. Colonel Norton is cool with it. So anyway, you mentioned that we were at Sandpoint this past weekend. That was fantastic. We had EMP Shield devices to show people. We had literature. So we're like ambassadors, right? We're out there. We are 100% behind EMP Shield. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff, book signings and contests and raffles and cool stuff. We actually, the list of stuff we're going to do together with EMP Shield is long, and we're still working on it because it's setting off ideas. The synapses are firing, and your synapses are firing. I can tell.
Yes, they are. Yes, the caffeine is starting to get to the molecular level. Well, and here's the thing about EMPs, and we'll talk about this more because Andrew's sitting in the background here waiting for us to discuss. When you and I were first introduced to this product, and we looked it up, and we looked at we looked at all the testing and all of that, and we'll talk about that with Andrew. I looked at you and I said, this is truly a Prepping 2.0 product. How many of us, let's just say a year ago, EMPs, well, when an EMP strikes or that sort of catastrophe happens, there's nothing you can do really about it except increase your survival for afterwards. That's all you can do. Kind of like what your team members said. Well, it's not what you can prevent, it's how to survive afterwards without all the electronics and the communications. Check it out, Prepping 2.0, you can prevent it. That's a prepping. This is a great example of that Prepping 2.0 product where it's become affordable, it's become available, and it makes it so that your survivability after a catastrophe, it's not just survivability, it's avoiding the catastrophe. I love it. So there you go.
Exactly. And this is a brand new thing, and Andrew will tell you about it. It's not like this has been around for 10 years and you've never heard of it. No, it's been around for 10 months or so.
Yeah,
And now you're hearing about it. So there we go. So as usual, we do the top 100 things that go the quickest in a collapse, and we're on item number 38. And this was not planned, but how apropos, as our French friends say.
That's a big word, Glenn.
It is. Well, I'm caffeinated and you're not. So
yes.
To me, it's a normal word. And to you, it's a big word.
Yes.
What is item number 38 and what's up with that?
Number 38, and again on our website, you can go to prepping2-0.com. It's in the little right. Number 38 is batteries. Yes, batteries like crazy. Store them well. Battery banks. all of those things. Keep a hold of them, but they're not going to do you any good if in an EMP. All of those go into the EMP. So yeah, store them in such a way, and we're going to talk more about that today, how you can store them so that they're protected so that you can use them after an EMP. Yes, sir.
And because I'm a geek, I have thoughts on batteries. I forced myself to learn sort of electrical stuff, not like EMP level stuff. Batteries, obviously you're going to want AA's, AAA's. C's and D's are pretty much not a thing anymore. 9 volts are pretty much not a thing anymore. One thing, if you get batteries on Amazon for screaming good prices, if it comes from Zhishuang Industries, it's probably not awesome. And also, one of the things, I make up Mandarin words. Would you like to hear some Szechuan words? Okay.
No.
And then one thing also with Amazon stuff, let's say like Everready lithium batteries, which are really good. Often when they're on Amazon, it's because they're an older batch. And if batteries, they have a shelf life, even the lithium ones, 10-ish years or something. And so sometimes on Amazon, you're going to get an older batch of batteries. Maybe not, maybe so, maybe the price is okay. Costco and Sam's Clubs have Duracell, awesome batteries, AA, AAA, get them in like the 30, 40, 50 pack and all of that. And try to keep them either in the original packaging or put them in their little organizational devices. The thing is if the ends are touching stuff, it's going to be a problem. And also change out your batteries in especially sensitive equipment. I have headphones, a headset, a Peltor headset that's $500, and one of the team dudes didn't change out his battery and it corroded a contact, and that's $500 to do that. If you have night vision, or you have, something similar, a PEC 15 or something on your AR, you got to really change them out every year and all of that. So there's more to this. But batteries, obviously, the use for them in a collapse situation is obvious. Consider rechargeable batteries too. That's a good thing for the maybe half hour a day that your generator's running. You can charge them up, and again, AA, AAA. Go for good rechargeable batteries. This is not a place to cheap out, because you can get batteries from Zhishuang Industries that are probably not awesome rechargeable batteries. Go with name brands, and it's an important thing. Those are obviously rechargeable, and they can kind of, in some sense, store longer because they probably don't have a charge to them. So that's number 38, batteries. Well, who cares about us? People want to hear from Andrew. Why don't you introduce our guest?
So with today is Andrew, and I believe, and he'll correct us, I'm sure, based on what you just said, he's the CEO of EMP Shield. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Good. So so glad you're here with us today. And I'm excited because I think a lot of our listeners and fans out there are going to be like, what? There's something that can prevent an EMP? What the what? If you are a prepper, this is like, nirvana of, prepping. So I'm excited to bring this topic to them, because I honestly, until you sent the email to us, I didn't know. I had no idea. And I read through, and you sent to us all the, honestly, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure. There's so much to talk about today. The government testing that your products have gone through. And the test, when I say testing, I'm sure it's when does it finally give up, and not, the stress testing. So, and I'm still stumbling on my words. So first of all, Andrew, tell us about yourself, and then tell us about how EMP Shield came to be about.
Absolutely. So, hey, everybody, I'm Andrew. I'm not the CEO. Actually, I am an owner, a co-owner, but I oversee the sales and marketing for EMP Shield. And a little bit about me. So former military, I spent about 10 years in special operations and 5 years as a medical officer. And I got out of the military to come assist Tim and Pete and Rowdy to build EMP Shield. And we are where we are today because of that. And just so you guys know, I'm still also working on my caffeination levels. But
understood.
Yeah. So anyways, how did EMP Shield come about? It's actually kind of unusual and interesting story, but Tim Carty is actually the inventor of EMP Shield. And he started a project where, smart people doing smart things. They were trying to pull solar electrostatic waves from the atmosphere and for an energy source, and they needed to build a surge protector for it. And again, doing smart people things, they said, we're not going to buy a surge protector. Let's just make it. It's much easier. And so they created a surge protector for that device, which is another project, for a different company. But they realized later on in the testing when they were developing this that, holy cow, this isn't a normal surge protector. This has the ability to protect against an EMP, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit about what an EMP really is. And so during the testing process, they said, well, shoot, in their tests, they realized it could protect against an EMP. So they said, well, why don't we just go, we'll get the money up front. We're going to go do some military certified testing. And that was the first time they went to a company called Keystone Compliance. I know a lot of people probably don't know what that is, but it's actually one of the nation's top DoD certified testing facilities. And they ran, and this is, probably 2 years ago now, but they ran the first series of tests. That first series was military standard 188.125.1, which probably doesn't mean a whole lot to a lot of listeners, but that is the high altitude EMP testing for EMP protection. And they passed and they said, wow, we're onto something. And then they from there, we kind of just started building this company, which officially became a company the 1st of January in 2019. So we're still new. We're still, growing, as I'm sure you guys know. But it's just such an incredible opportunity for me. And a little bit more about me, but, the whole for prepping and survival, this has been my life, probably about half my life now, coming from the military. And I had several projects before where I was deeply involved with survival and prepping. And it's kind of more of a lifestyle for me than just, an idea or a thought. But, when I had the opportunity and I was called up they said, hey, Andrew, we need a marketing and sales guy for EMP Shield. My first thought was when I heard that there was an EMP device, I said, no, that's not a real thing. And it was kind of funny, it actually took me a few weeks to come around, like it does most people, because when they hear you can protect against an EMP, like my mind, I was like, you can't protect against an EMP. Obviously, we all know that a Faraday cage is the only way to do it. And a couple weeks of research and really deep, intense understanding of it, I came to realize that, holy cow. Well, it wasn't just me realizing. Actually, it was the fact that the military was involved. And then I realized that as well. And I was like, okay, I'm on board. And now I have the coolest job in the world. We get to help people. We're not only selling devices that actually are military certified and protect against EMPs for cars and homes and generators and whatnot. But even better is we're helping people, because if something like an EMP or a solar storm or a coronal mass ejection actually happens, we're going to be in a world of hurt, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later on down the road on this interview. But the fact that I get to help people and help raise awareness about what an EMP is and how people can be protected from it is just such an incredible opportunity. So I say I have the best job in the world, and I really do. And thank you guys so much for having me on. And I'm so excited to be working with you guys. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a little bit about me.
Well, one of the things, Andrew, that you told me when we spoke, that much like the Colonel Norton moment, was a thing that made me think this is a real important endeavor. Yeah. First of all, you're very clear that you want to help people, and that resonates with Shelby and me, because we're in the same boat. I mean, this is not our day job. We don't pay our mortgage, this way. And so it's to let people know and get the message out. And you have the same thing. But here's a very specific thing that I picked up on. Sure. And that was, here you are, you're in the special operations community. You've got 15 years in. If you just stick around 5 more years, you can retire and life is good for you. And you decided not to retire. You decided to get out early. And with a couple cool jobs that you had in the military, really cool jobs, and start up a company like last year. It's just when people do stuff like that, that speaks to me. And obviously, if you're in the special operations community, you're a pretty bright guy. The guys I know in that community they're all really, really smart. And so it's not like somebody said, the classic thing like pumpkin futures, in late October, the pumpkin price going up. Remember Homer Simpson on The Simpsons bought a bunch of pumpkin futures in November, right? That kind of thing. Yep. So it's not like you're right, classic. It's not like you're a Dumbo. So anyway, you mentioned EMPs, and this is not going to be the full detailed discussion of what EMPs are. Dr. Pry is going to be doing that, and it's not like you don't know what you're talking about. It's just that we need to just go over it again so people understand. It's an electromagnetic pulse, and tell people in general terms what all that is and why it's a problem. I mean, what's the problem that we need to solve, basically? Yeah,
absolutely. So I really wish they would have named it something different to start, because there's such a huge misconception about what an EMP is and how it affects things. Although there is magnetism involved, the thing about an EMP is what's damaging components like microprocessors that include silicon arsenide, which is the thing that cracks when heat is generated, is we're dealing with electricity. That's in general terms, what we're doing is protecting it against electricity. And one of the big things that we get asked all the time when we say, hey, look, here's our military certified testing, is people say, well, did you test this with a nuclear weapon? I said, no, of course not.
Yeah, we would have heard about that. We would have heard about that. Yeah.
That might have made the news. And it wouldn't have been fake, exactly.
And I have fun with it. I'm like, yeah, we went to Antarctica. No, of course not. Yeah, we went to a military certified testing lab, right? And so let's talk about just really, we'll talk briefly about an EMP. So, there's two things that can create an EMP. One is a nuclear weapon going off in the atmosphere, and of course, there's probably newer weapons that could just create an EMP. But in this scenario, we're going to talk about what we know is actually around right now. So we've got nuclear weapons, and you've got the sun, which creates solar flares. We call them coronal mass ejections, or CMEs. So we'll use a nuclear weapon in this example. So what happens is, scientists say that 300 miles above the Earth is a good distance. If a nuclear weapon goes off, there's a couple things that occur. We split it into three phases: the E1, the E2, and the E3, and I'll briefly describe them. So the first is the E1. So what happens is when a nuclear weapon goes off in the atmosphere, it creates gamma radiation. So the blast goes out in all directions, which we're going to explain here in a second why that's important. And that gamma radiation hits the atmosphere. And when it hits the atmosphere, it creates a thing called ionization. And ionization just means that the radiation's hitting the atmosphere, and freed electrons are then shot and spiraled towards the Earth at roughly the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. And so the E1 pulse, we call it a pulse, but when I talk to customers on the phone and I talk to people, I kind of refer to it as a very fast raining of electricity towards the Earth. And so what you have is anywhere from 90 to 150,000 volts of electricity raining towards the Earth in nanoseconds. And that's created through ionization. So what you have in the E1 is things like, anything that has a microprocessor that's not shielded, and like I mentioned before, silicon arsenide and other components like that inside of microprocessors. So basically, everything that's a conductor induces this electricity in this first E1 pulse. The grid's not going to be impacted or affected by it, but other devices will be, because it's a very fast, very quick induction of electricity into components or into devices. So, what you're looking at is, if you have let's say you have a computer that for some reason doesn't have shielding inside of it, it induces electrons. There's a likelihood that it could be destroyed from the E1 pulse. But like I said, the grid's not impacted. What you have then is the E2, which follows suit with the E1. It happens in the microseconds. And the E2 is basically the remaining...
And Andrew, I hate to interrupt you, but we need to break for segment 2. So we're going to continue in the next segment with the E2 and then the E3 and coronal mass ejection. Stay with us.
We'll be right back with more of Prepping 2.0 with authors Shelby Gallagher and Glenn Tate right after this.
Prepper Press is a small, independent publisher of survival nonfiction and post-apocalyptic fiction. At prepperpress.com, you'll find a variety of books to guide you on your journey to prepare for a compromise to the electrical grid, natural disasters, economic collapse, political strife, or similar scenarios that could disrupt life as we know it. You'll also discover fictional yet believable stories about what happens to society when everything falls apart. To learn more, visit Prepper Press online at prepperpress.com.
Hi everyone, Glen Tate here.
And Shelby Gallagher here. People always ask us whether a particular property would be good for prepping.
Well, luckily there's someone who does this for a living, and that's Brian at Strategic Landscape Design. He's a bug-out location consultant for a new property or the one you already have.
Strategic Landscape Design shows you how to make your property productive for you now and when the collapse comes. Visit strategiclandscapedesign.com and see all the things Brian can do for you and your property. That's strategiclandscapedesign.com.
PrepperNet, where preppers unite. Looking to meet other like-minded people in your area? Looking to start your own prepper group? Already have a group? Join PrepperNet.com. PrepperNet has gathered the biggest names in the industry to help unite preppers everywhere. Join John Jacob Schmidt, Scott Hunt, Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy, Glen Tate, Shelby Gallagher, Charlie Hogwood, Samuel Culper, Survivor Jane, Rick Austin, Franklin Horton, Ryan Mitchell, and Brian Duff. Our team is united. Check us out at PrepperNet.com. PrepperNet, where preppers unite. PrepperNet.com.
And we're back with more of Prepping 2.0 with authors Glen Tate and Shelby Gallagher.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Shelby Gallagher, and our guest today on Prepping 2.0 is Andrew from EMP Shield. And I'm sitting here just getting into the science of what he's talking about, and breaking down what exactly an EMP is. And it's good to know. And I sit here and I think about, he's going through this, I'm thinking about all the questions I answered on my recent ham test, and I know what he's talking about. I'm so proud of myself. So go ahead, Andrew. You were talking about E2s. That's where we left off. Keep on going.
Yeah, thanks for the break. I had more time to drink some coffee. So let's go to E2. So what it is basically you have the matter from a nuclear weapon then hitting the atmosphere, following suit from the E1. Again, there's still remaining electrons in the atmosphere. So that matter hits the atmosphere. Again, there's ionization. And then in the microseconds, you then have raining electrons coming towards the Earth. That's the E1 and the E2. And again, I want to emphasize it's electricity. We're dealing with electricity. Magnetism really comes into the E3 portion of an EMP. And this is, and again, I know why they named it an EMP, but it creates such a misconception about what we're dealing with. Because again, like I mentioned before, an EMP is electricity. That's what we're worried about. That's what's damaging things is electricity. Yes, there's magnetism, and I'll explain how that works. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, when a nuclear bomb goes off in the atmosphere, it's actually going off in all directions, right? It blows up, it goes out, it goes towards the Earth. And so what happens is if a nuclear weapon goes off, it's pushing outwards away from the Earth as well. And what we have around the Earth is called the magnetosphere. And so if you imagine, and this is kind of the way I think about it in my mind, you guys, you ever blow a piece of bubble gum and there's like a really thin portion that it kind of creates like a secondary bubble? Have you guys ever experienced that?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's the same thing with a nuclear weapon going off, believe it or not. So what's happening is when a nuclear weapon goes off, it actually bubbles out the magnetosphere because it's, it's a huge explosion, right? And so what happens is this magnetosphere wants to be in its normal state. It wants to be rounded and around the Earth. It's designed. It's just the way it is. And so when the bomb pushes out on it, it then fluctuates. And it fluctuates over time. It can be anywhere from minutes to hours, and it's fluctuating, trying to get back to its normal state because it's like, got to go back to normal, do my thing. And while it's fluctuating, it's actually creating a magnetic pulse. And so imagine, let's see, how do I explain this? So you have a magnet, and when you wave a magnet over, if you were to wave a magnet over a wire with electricity, and it actually creates an electrostatic type charge. And so it's the same concept, but on a global level. So when the magnetosphere is fluctuating, it's actually building a charge inside of things like the grid, for instance. And this is why the E3 could be devastating for the grid, because you have hundreds of miles of wire with electrons inside of it. And there's nothing to stop that charge from building. So you've got the magnetosphere fluctuating, and you just have a charge which you'd be building over hours, building inside of things like the grid. And it's not only impacting the grid, but that charge is also trying to go inside of your house. And so unless you find a way to break the grid or stop that charge from coming inside your house, electronics will then be destroyed. I mean, you're going to have wires that could be glowing red hot. And it's kind of I think we alluded to this earlier, but a good example is also an E3 and a solar flare. So they're very similar. The only difference is, when you have a solar flare, the sun shoots off the flare, which is then basically putting, it's protons and electrons. And so what's happening is these are coming towards the Earth, and they're hitting the magnetosphere from the opposite side. And this actually occurred in 1859. It's called the Carrington event. And it's a good example of what could actually happen. Although during this time, it was when they first invented the telegraph. But it gives us a good idea of what damage and what impact you have today. So back then, they had a solar flare that was the equivalent of a million plus nuclear weapons hitting the atmosphere. We're talking big time. If it happened today, it would be so significant that, we'd be out for potentially years and years. But it hit the atmosphere. You had wires that were glowing red hot. You had telegraphs that were running for hours without being plugged in, without batteries. The houses were catching on fire. That's how large the solar flare was. And so basically, you've got the solar flare, which is creating a very similar event to that of an E3. And if this occurred today, there's a huge potential that we may not even come back from it, because something like a million plus nuclear weapons hitting the atmosphere and the charge that would generate from it could destroy the entire grid. It could destroy all electronics. It would be significant.
Oh, wow. So that was
an information pulse.
That was
sorry, guys.
No, that's great. That's why we're here.
So, and the reason why I'm like, wow, is because, that was very detailed. That might have seemed simple to you, Andrew, but for the rest of us, my knowledge of EMPs are what I've learned from what, 2 second, what is that book? 1 second after?
1 second after. Yep.
1 second after. And then also, from just other preppers. So it's basically, the picture I have in my mind, you're driving in your car and done. Right. Everything electronic is done. Your car is done. You're done, and it's not coming back. So that's the practical side of it, which is not good. So that's what you prep for. But the other thing that I think is interesting is just that there's two ways to do it, and it's not mystical. It's not that's something that you only read about in fictional novels. That's the zombie apocalypse. That's not going to happen. No, these are things that can really happen. And number two, there are political forces out there that are taking test shots at the United States right now to see if they can do that. And Glen's raising his hand.
I was going to talk about sort of the inevitability of we're toast, and this is something I talked to Andrew about when we spoke on the phone. One of my team guys, Scotty, we were having a conversation, as we often do, about different triggers to the collapse, and basically, are there special preparations you need for them? And we did the usual list of all of them, and then at the end, as an afterthought, was EMPs. And by the way, coronal mass ejections would be in there too. And because no satellites, no electricity, all that kind of stuff would be a big problem. And basically with EMPs, and I said, EMP, we might live about 2 weeks on what we got, and then pretty much we're dead, because there's no way to come back from one of these, and there's no way to prepare for it. And he nods, he goes, yeah, we're toast. And that's what's different now with you guys, because you're not toast. And now, so you were talking about your house, and we'll use that. And I know EMP shields can go on generators and in vehicles and other things, and you can talk about that. So, and here's a almost sillily, and every show I invent a word. Today it's sillily, which is an adverb.
It's crazy that I don't, because I'm the one who's just over here like sleep deprived. But go ahead, you got this.
It's an adverb squared, sillily. Anyway,
sillily.
Yeah, it's a math thing.
Oh my gosh, you used math in it too. It hurts.
But the silly question is, you've got an EMP shield, and you'll explain this, that is basically a surge protector for your house. Let's say you have a cell phone, which is not connected to anything. It's in your hip pocket of your jeans. Yep. And EMP or CME hits is, I'm guessing, the cell phone, the electronics and the circuitry could be subject to being fried. But if you have an EMP shield in, say, your house, then all the wires in your house are not going to be fried. Is that what we're talking about?
Generally speaking, but I love that you mentioned cell phones, and I love, so there's a ton of EMP myths out there, and let's actually talk about cell phones right quick. So when you're looking at modern day smartphones, believe it or not, there is a level of shielding built inside of them. It's to defend against different frequencies, RF frequencies. So it's a huge misconception that if an EMP occurs, your phone will get destroyed. Now, some will, some won't. It depends on how old they are and what kind of shielding they have inside. But I'm holding one of the newer iPhones in my hand right now. And if an EMP occurred, the only thing that would probably happen is my smartphone would turn off and I'd be able to turn it right back on, believe it or not. However, yep.
Because you still play Angry Birds. That's the real one.
Yeah, that's right. So in the apocalypse, I'm just doing the Angry Birds thing, and it's great right now. So
those birds are angry because there's been an apocalypse.
But there is some truth to it as well. So let's talk about that. So let's say your cell phone is plugged in. You're charging, an EMP occurs while you're sleeping. That will be fried. And so, because you're going to have. Actually, we'll talk about this real quick. You mentioned a house. And I'm sure a lot of listeners know this, but some don't. So I'd love to explain it. What happens during an EMP is it's not like a normal surge where you have dirty electricity, which is a spike coming into your house from the power lines. That happens on a daily basis. Although the electrical companies don't like to admit it, most of them produce dirty electricity, which is killing your appliances. But in an EMP, you've actually got the induction of electrons not only being induced into the grid, but they're also going straight through the structure of your home, right into your home's Romex wiring, your devices. Everything that's a conductor is inducing electricity from those freed electrons that we talked about earlier. And so what you have is, if you're plugged into your house and your home, every home has Romex wiring or some form of wiring, it's a huge collector of electricity. Same with, solar panels. A solar panel has 5,000 square feet of copper trace inside of it. It's like a microgrid. And that copper trace is going to induce a huge amount of electricity, which is then going to be pushed into your home. And so if you have things plugged into your home while an EMP occurs, they will be fried. It absolutely is going to happen. And so what the EMP shield is doing and what makes it unique, and I like being honest, you're correct. It is a surge protector, but it is not like any other surge protector that's out there. So what the EMP shield does is it's actually looking in both directions on the line, and it's looking 250 linear feet, which we have tested. We actually zapped the side of a house in military testing, which we'll talk here in a second, but it's looking in both directions. So it's looking for a huge amount of electricity trying to come into the home from the grid. It's also actively looking for the induction of electricity into your home itself. And so regardless of where the electricity is coming from or how it's induced, the EMP shield is able to shunt, which means basically shunting is pulling electricity from the line. We're deterring a charge from building, which is ultimately deterring heat from generating inside of the system. And we're pushing it to the ground before that heat can get hot enough to destroy components inside your house. And what's unique about the EMP shield is it doesn't do this in a second. It actually begins shunting in 500, it's basically less than a billionth of a second. So 500 trillionths of a second.
So like my attention span.
So, oh gosh. So what you're saying, and I read that I did read that in the literature that you sent in the testing, that 1 billionth of a second preempts the
ill effects.
The ill effects. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is what people need to understand is it's not the induction of electricity that destroys things like silicon arsenide inside of a microprocessor. It's the heat that's generated from the charge. And so what we've learned is if we can deter that heat from building, we're able to save things that have microprocessors inside of them. Because basically you stop the heat, you save the device. And so that's why speed is so incredibly important. As we call it switching, but the device begins switching in 500 trillionths of a second, and we're pulling that charge from the system to the ground quick enough to where there's no heat generated. And it's a little bit different because that occurs during the E1 and the E2. But the reason, and so for people that don't know about EMP shield, is the home model is tied into your home's breaker box. It goes to 220 amp breakers, which is then a part of the system. It goes on L1 and L2. Most homes have two phases, which generates 240 volts of electricity to power like your dryer and things like that. And so what happens is normally it'll occur at the end of the E2 or the beginning of E3, which is what we saw in testing. But when there is a large enough amount of electricity, we actually pop the main breakers on your breaker box during the E3. And that's very intentional because we don't want to allow that huge amount of electricity being built on the grid during the E3 portion to come into the home. So what happens is the shield stops, pops the breaker so that charge isn't coming in, and then continues to shunt additional electricity as possible. It's an incredible device. And, like I said, I didn't even believe it was a real thing. It took me a month or two to come around until I realized, like, holy cow, we've got DOD, DHS. We are working with several government entities where we've actually, I'm going to tell you guys something. It's public knowledge, but it hasn't really been announced. But most people don't realize this. The EMP shield that you guys see on the website is just one of like 5 or 6 technologies that we have in our company. It's our civilian line of products that we're selling. We actually have a whole different series of technologies that we're using for government applications. And it's just, it's funny that maybe this is how a lot of inventions come about, but an accidental discovery of something now can prevent or deter a charge from building inside your house, which will protect from an EMP. So it's such a neat piece of technology.
Well, and I know Glenn wants to jump here. It's comforting to me that government is using your product, because that tells me that there's the local PUDs and things like that, public utility districts and utility companies are realizing how vulnerable they are. I will say this: government has been very clear on this. This is, again, not fiction.
Yes.
The Department of Justice and I believe Homeland Security have both come out saying we are at extremely high risk for EMPs. The person we're having on it.
Yeah.
It's not just the fiction.
We lost your audio there, Shelby. So go ahead and try to recover. And I will go ahead and there you go.
Keep going.
Okay. Well, no, you keep going. You were just saying that the federal government has said that we're woefully unprepared and sort of like, hey, don't blame us, which I think is interesting political cover. Like anyone's going to remember that after an EMP. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Andrew, so I'm conceptualizing, I'm thinking of Shelby and my own home. So we've got an EMP shield hooked into sort of the breaker box, basically. So the wiring in the house is okay. This thing has probably fried transmission lines somewhere. That's a good thing. And so there's probably not going to be, at least for a while, like possibly a year or two, electricity from the normal sources coming into the house. So we've got it's like a power outage, but our house is okay. This is where generators come in, because if you have an EMP shielded generator and an EMP shielded house, and of course you'll need fuel and all of that for the generator, then you can power your own house or parts thereof. I'm a big fan of we're going to have Stephen Harris on, by the way, who's like the alternate energy guru. He's one of our other guests I forgot to mention. He's coming on in a while. But anyway, so you can power, we're not going to have all the lights on and the microwave going, the blender making milkshakes and stuff, but you can have a shielded generator and a shielded house, and maybe some of your devices, like the cell phones you were mentioning. That is an urban legend, by the way, that you're like EMP mythbusters right now. And
if we need to thank, if we can thank Apple for one thing, it's developing shielded phones. Okay, that's all I'm going to thank Apple for.
That's it. Nothing else.
Exactly.
But I just wanted to make the point that the idea out there, the correct assumption, the one that I had, 4 minutes before we spoke the first time, was that, the power lines are fried, so whatever. Really, does it matter? Yeah, it does matter, because if your wiring is protected and your method of generating electricity is protected, then you might be the only one among 10,000 people who's got power, which means you need a lot of guns, by the way, but that's a whole different topic. And these work in vehicles too. Tell us about that, because that's a big deal. There are people that buy, 1986 Ford F-150s specifically to be EMP proof, and now you don't need to do that. So talk about the vehicle application of EMP shields.
Absolutely. And in fact, since we're talking about myths, I'll start with this. Actually, I'll start with 2 things. The first is, we mentioned about the government being serious about EMPs. And I'm just going to quickly highlight, this is for people who want to realize that it's actually a very serious thing. The president actually put out an executive order a few months ago that said the government has to start being prepared against EMPs. That's how serious this is, which we can talk about more here in a minute. But
can I jump in, Andrew?
Sure.
If people watch the news and quit paying attention to the Kardashians and all that, going to say it, North Korea has been taking kind of taking EMP shots at us. They've been taking test shots. It's not just, hey, let's throw a missile up there. They're testing out the ability to do that. So these are real.
Yeah, this is a
scenarios.
An EMP is a nation killer. It really could be. And it takes it'll take quite a while to be prepared enough on the grid level to be able to protect against it. So that's why it's so significant. But for the vehicle, let's talk about myths again. I love throwing out myths. There's a huge one, and it's more people who are more knowledgeable about EMPs always throw this question towards me. I don't know if it was the EMP Commission, I don't quite recall who, but there was actually a government series of testing that was done on vehicles, and I'm totally going to debunk this myth right now. People come to me and they say, hey, the government tested EMPs on vehicles, and they said that there will only 10% will be affected. That's not true. So let's talk about that real quick, and then I'll explain how the EMP shield works on the vehicle. But for those who do know what I'm talking about, it's a farce, and here's why. The government was allotted to use vehicles from a military motor pool, and they were actually given instructions that they cannot damage any vehicles. When they tested the vehicles, these military vehicles with EMPs, they only did anywhere from 10 to 20,000 volts of electricity. So, and we're talking in the 90s. And so these are vehicles that have less microelectronics, small things like ECUs inside of them. So these are older vehicles getting zapped with only up to 20,000 volts of electricity, and 10% failed. Now imagine if we recreated that test today with a modern day vehicle, 2019 Ford F-250, and you zap it with 150,000 volts of electricity. And I use that argument all the time because if 10% failed at 20,000 volts, imagine what's going to happen if you zap a modern day vehicle with 150,000 volts of electricity, which we actually do plan on doing here in the next 6 months. We're just waiting for our R&D lab to get built so we can do internal testing on actual vehicles. But the reality is that if an EMP occurs, and you have a modern day vehicle and it's a large EMP that's anywhere from 100 to 150,000 volts of electricity, the likelihood of your vehicle not functioning is extremely high. And that's why you need an EMP shield. Because imagine you're 50 miles away from your home. You're one of those, it's sad, but you're commuting to work, you get an hour-long drive, and you're an hour away with vehicle driving, and your car stops. There's a high likelihood you might not make it home, because if everybody's vehicle stops functioning, it's now a hit the fan scenario, and you've got to make it home alive. So it's an incredibly dangerous situation that could occur. And so I'll explain very quickly how the EMP shield in the vehicle works. Inside of a car or truck, 95% of vehicles, other than mostly military vehicles, planes and boats, you've got a 12-volt DC system. And so just like a home, your car is a huge conductor of electricity. It's going to induce a large amount of electrons coming down from the atmosphere. And actually, although we say large, and during our testing, it was 0.014% induction rate from the side of a house that was induced. So if it's 100,000 volts of electricity, your car is going to induce 600, 700 volts of electricity, which is pretty significant considering it's a 12-volt system. And so what happens is the shield is passively looking into that system. It can see, regardless of where electrons are induced, whether it's the back of the car, whether they just come into the taillight, or whether the entire vehicle is inducing electrons, we see a rise in voltage inside the system, which goes above what's called a clamping level. So basically, anytime that voltage goes above 15 volts inside the vehicle, the passive device then activates and begins shunting, and we do what's called an improvised shunt to the frame. And so what's happening is, and we learned this during testing, is when the vehicle induces, it goes above a clamping level, we shunt to the frame, knowing that it will then be reinduced back into the electrical system because it's all a singular entity on top of rubber tires. However, what we learned in our testing is that when the electricity is shunted and then reinduced, it's at a lower level. Again, we talked about speed for the device. Because it's shunting at 500 trillionths of a second, and it's going to continue to do this when it sees over voltage, it actually shunts cyclically as it's shunting and then reinduced. And over less than a microsecond, it's then dissipated a charge because it goes to the frame, back to the electrical system at a lower charge, back to the frame, and it does this cyclically. And then, in less than a microsecond, every time it's reinduced, it's at a lower level, and we actually dissipate the charge that way.
So it sounds like pushing on the brakes, a couple times, and you're kind of slowing it down and dissipating the energy. But it's happening lots faster.
That's correct.
Wow, that's so cool.
We have about 2 minutes for the regular show. And Andrew, I was just going to ask you to click off the top EMP myths. Maybe not the reasons why they're myths, but like, what are the top EMP myths? And you got about 2 minutes. Go.
Yeah. Okay. EMP myths. Oh my gosh. Well, the first one is the only thing you need is a Faraday cage. So let's talk about a Faraday cage real quick. Yes, Faraday cages are awesome. They work. If you're listening, please do not go out and spend $200 or $300 on a Faraday bag. Go buy yourself some aluminum foil. We've tested it. Aluminum foil, you get 2 heavy, sheets of, you make sure that you build a box, make sure that the device you have inside the box is protected by not touching the metal itself. So use a cardboard box, and you can actually absolutely build your own Faraday cage for about $5. We have a video on how to do that online. So the first myth is that the only thing that protects against an EMP is a Faraday cage. Until a year ago, 2 years ago, that was absolutely correct. However, with the research and the technology we have these days, it is absolutely not true. You're dealing with electricity. You can absolutely shunt that electricity away without allowing a charge to build. So that's the first myth. Let's see, other myths. Wow, you got me on the spot. I'm still thinking in my mind about how we said Shelby was a vampire earlier. It's kind of weird.
Oh, wow, you still have that. Well, and we need to wrap up here, so we'll stop you there while you still think of some of your other myths. But, oh my gosh, so how much time do we have left, Mr. Tate?
A couple of seconds. The after show will have more stuff. Shelby, take us out.
Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Have a good week, everyone.
You've been listening to Prepping 2.0 with authors Shelby Gallagher and Glen Tate. All of the fun and easy prepping information heard on this podcast can be found online at prepping2-0.com. You can also find out more about Glen's books online at 299days.com and about Shelby's books online at agreatstate.com. Until next time, be smart, be safe, and be prepared.